Beneath the surface of history lies a silence so carefully constructed it almost feels intentional. The textbooks tell us of Rome, of Greece, of Egypt and Mesopotamia, yet in the blank spaces between these familiar names there are whispers of something else. An empire too vast to ignore, yet somehow erased from the pages we are taught to trust. Tartaria, a word that now feels half myth, half memory, yet once stretched across maps, engraved on globes and spoken by travellers as if it were undeniable. And yet, when you turn to the records of official history, Tartaria is not merely diminished, it is gone. This is not the erasure of a small village, not the fading of a forgotten kingdom. Tartaria was painted across continents. It covered territories so massive that it dwarfed many of the so-called great empires of the past. It appeared in the writings of scholars, in the reports of explorers, in the meticulous drawings of cartographers who mapped the world. Yet now, as if with the stroke of a pen, it is gone. Relegated to a myth, dismissed as a geographical error, a misunderstanding. But how can an empire that once covered much of Asia, even spilling into the lands we know as Europe and Russia, be dismissed as a cartographic mistake? The truth is, history does not simply vanish. History is erased. Imagine for a moment the effort it would take to strip a civilization from collective memory, the libraries that would need to be burned, the textbooks that would need to be rewritten, the maps and globes destroyed or replaced. Generations of children raised never hearing the word. This is not neglect, this is deliberate. And if something has been erased with such precision, it means that what was erased carried a truth too dangerous to leave behind. The shadows of Tartaria still leak through the cracks. Old maps forgotten in attics or tucked away in university archives still carry the name Tartary, sprawled across territories larger than the Roman Empire ever dreamed of. Travellers from centuries past wrote of cities of impossible scale, of architecture so advanced it seemed beyond their own. Even today you can stand in front of certain buildings with their ornate domes, impossible arches and intricate designs, and feel the whisper of a lost world. They look out of place, too advanced for their time, too uniform, too global, as if they were not the product of scattered kingdoms, but of a singular culture, a unified empire. And yet, we are told it never existed. Why? Who benefits from its erasure? Perhaps because Tartaria held knowledge we were never meant to keep. Stories tell of free energy harnessed from the very air, structures built not just to shelter but to power, cities designed not as crude imitations of survival but as harmonic reflections of nature itself. If such technology once existed, and if it were erased, then its absence begins to make sense. For those who wish to control, knowledge is the most dangerous threat of all. But beyond the towers, beyond the architecture, beyond even the mystery of lost technology, there lingers the deeper question. If Tartaria was real, what happened to its people? Millions scattered across vast lands. Did they vanish in an instant? Were they absorbed into other nations, rewritten into other identities? Or was there something more catastrophic, some great reset of the world that swallowed Tartaria whole? We are left with fragments, ruins that do not belong to the timeline we are given, maps that show us what should not be, photographs that hint at truths deliberately ignored, and a silence, a heavy silence that surrounds the very word Tartaria. To erase an empire is to erase not only its buildings, but its memory, its culture, its language, its very soul. Yet fragments remain because no erasure is ever perfect. Somewhere, hidden in the dust of forgotten libraries, in the cracks of ancient stone, in the faint lines of discarded maps, Tartaria still lingers. And the question that haunts us is not simply what was Tartaria, but rather why were we never meant to know? Because if Tartaria truly existed, and if its story has been buried beneath centuries of lies, then what else have we been denied? What other truths, what other histories have been deliberately hidden from us? And who holds the power to decide what humanity is allowed to remember and what it must forget? In the silence of this forgotten empire, we feel the weight of the cover-up. It is not just the vanishing of a name on a map, it is the vanishing of possibility itself. There is a strange kind of honesty in old maps. Before history was narrowed into the neat borders we now accept, cartographers sketched the world as they knew it, sometimes imperfectly, sometimes with imagination, but often with a raw truth that today feels impossible to ignore. And within those ancient drawings, spread across atlases and globes of centuries past, lies a name repeated over and over again, Tartaria. It wasn't a small notation, not a forgotten corner scribbled in haste. Tartaria dominated the maps, a vast stretch of land sweeping across Asia, reaching into Siberia, even touching the edges of Europe. Its sheer size rivaled the greatest empires humanity has ever known. To dismiss it as a mistake, as modern historians often do, is to insult the meticulous craft of cartographers who dedicated their lives to documenting the world. These were not amateurs sketching guesses on parchment. Many of these maps were funded by kings, explorers, universities. They carried the weight of authority. And yet, century after century, Tartaria appears. Why then? Is it absent from our textbooks today? When you study these maps, you notice something strange. Different cartographers from different countries who had never met recorded Tartaria with striking consistency. It wasn't an invention of one man's imagination. It was a shared understanding of geography. Even globes from the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries proudly bear the name. It was common knowledge, undeniable, and yet now it is as if we are asked to believe it was nothing more than an illusion. But maps do more than label. They tell stories. Look closely and you see cities marked within Tartaria's vast expanse, settlements, trade routes, rivers flowing between them. You see boundaries suggesting a structured civilization, not empty wilderness. These details raise questions that modern history refuses to answer. If Tartaria was merely a vague reference to Siberia, as the official line suggests, then why does it appear with such detail, such permanence? Why are entire atlases dedicated to a land we are now told never existed? There's a darker thought that lingers behind the silence. If cartographers of the past knew too much, if their maps revealed a world that does not fit into the narrative later imposed, then those maps themselves became dangerous. To erase an empire, you must also erase the evidence of its existence, which means destroying or dismissing maps that contradict the new story. And indeed, many such maps have vanished, locked away in archives, dismissed as curiosities, or hidden in collections never displayed to the public. Still, some survived, and those survivors whisper. They remind us of what was once undeniable. They show us a world where Tartaria was not a myth but a fact. And it is in these faint lines of ink, faded with time, that the cover-up reveals itself. Consider what it means for a civilization to be drawn so prominently for centuries, only to disappear without explanation. Wars are recorded, famines are remembered, empires rise and fall, their ruins still standing. But Tartaria is not treated as a fallen empire. It is treated as if it never existed. That is not the natural process of history. That is the hand of deliberate erasure. And so we are left to wonder, what truth did these cartographers know? Were they merely recording what travellers and merchants brought back? Stories of massive cities and advanced architecture across lands now painted as barren wilderness? Or did they themselves glimpse a civilization so powerful that its very existence had to be rewritten? Perhaps the maps are more than drawings. Perhaps they are fragments of forbidden knowledge. Knowledge that suggests humanity once lived under a global power, one that united vast territories with shared design, shared technology, perhaps even shared energy. Knowledge that, if acknowledged, would upend the very foundations of the story we are taught about civilization's slow, linear progress. There is one more unsettling possibility. What if Tartaria's erasure was not just about rewriting history, but about controlling the future? If maps revealed truths that contradict the narrative of scarcity, division, and slow progress, then to acknowledge Tartaria is to acknowledge that humanity once lived differently, perhaps freer, perhaps with technology that rendered control unnecessary. Such knowledge would threaten the powers that rely on keeping humanity tethered to their systems. The cartographers may not have realized it, but in faithfully drawing what they knew, they were preserving forbidden history. A history someone, somewhere, decided humanity must never fully see. The maps should not exist, yet they do. They survive like whispers of another world, a world that lingers beneath the one we are told to accept. And when you look at them long enough, you begin to feel it, the weight of erasure, the silence of truths hidden in plain sight. All across the world there are buildings that should not exist, not because they are ruins or because they are too fragile to have withstood the passage of centuries, but because they defy the logic of the timeline we have been given. Towers with arches so precise they rival modern engineering, domes that rise impossibly high without the aid of cranes, vast stone structures with symmetry so exact it would challenge even the most advanced builders today. And yet these buildings are scattered across lands where the people of their time were supposedly primitive, limited in tools, knowledge, and means. They are relics that whisper of a civilization unaccounted for. They are the fingerprints of Tartaria. Stand before a cathedral in Russia, a palace in Central Asia, or a government building in America, and you may begin to see it. The same patterns repeat themselves, onion-shaped domes crowned with spires, intricate facades adorned with symbols that seem less decorative and more purposeful, as if they were encoding something forgotten. Windows, arches, and columns all bearing the same curious aesthetic, as though they belonged not to separate nations, but to a single hand, a single culture that spanned continents. We are told these buildings were designed independently, each crafted by local architects inspired by nothing more than coincidence. But is coincidence enough to explain such striking uniformity? Consider the scale. Some of these structures rise impossibly tall for their time. We are told they were built with horses, ropes, and wooden scaffolding. Yet modern engineers quietly admit that even today, with all our machinery, reconstructing them would be a daunting task. How then did societies with far less knowledge achieve such feats? Did they stumble upon techniques we have since lost, or were they inheriting remnants of an older, greater knowledge passed down from a civilization erased? The details tell an even stranger story. Many of these structures contain elements that go beyond beauty. Metal rods reaching skyward, copper domes shaped in a way that seems designed to harness energy, foundations embedded with stone channels and patterns that resemble circuitry. To the untrained eye, it looks like decoration. To the curious, it looks like technology disguised as art. And here lies the unsettling question. If these buildings were not mere expressions of style, but devices, machines capable of channeling energy, resonating with the earth, or even producing power, then their existence changes everything. It means that the so-called primitive societies who built them were, in fact, working with knowledge that surpasses even our own. Knowledge that was not lost by accident, but hidden. Some researchers point to the concept of free energy, the idea that ancient builders knew how to harness the natural electromagnetic field of the earth, that the domes, spires, and intricate designs were not for worship but for function, receiving and transmitting energy to power cities in ways we can barely imagine. If true, then what we call cathedrals, government halls, or exposition buildings might once have been something far more extraordinary, power stations of a forgotten world. And yet, the narrative we are given reduces them to curiosities, ornamental, symbolic, coincidental. It is easier to dismiss them as anomalies than to confront what they suggest, because to acknowledge their true purpose would mean admitting that history as we know it is incomplete. It would mean admitting that another civilization, perhaps Tartaria, once existed with knowledge so advanced it challenges the very idea of progress. The architecture out of time is more than stone and mortar. It is a clue carved into the landscape that refuses to be silenced. Even after wars destroyed cities, even after fires consumed libraries, even after narratives were rewritten, the buildings remained, too large to erase, too permanent to hide completely. They stand as monuments not only to what was built, but to what was covered up. And when you walk past them today, perhaps without noticing, you are brushing against the edges of a story buried beneath centuries of denial. The smooth curve of an arch, the shine of a dome, the impossible precision of stone, they are all fragments of a language humanity once spoke, a language of harmony, energy and power now denied to us. What is most haunting is this. Many of these buildings were not destroyed. They were repurposed. Cathedrals converted into churches, palaces turned into administrative halls, structures rebranded, their original purpose rewritten into something more acceptable, and in doing so the memory of what they were was stripped away, yet their true nature still lingers, encoded in their design, waiting for us to remember. They call it progress when history resets. A new calendar begins, a new ruler ascends, a new chapter is written. But beneath the smooth words of historians and the tidy boundaries of timelines, there are fractures, whispers of something darker. A reset is never clean. It is violent. It is deliberate. And when you look closely enough at the past, you begin to see the unmistakable signs that humanity has lived through not one, but many resets. Events that tore away entire civilizations, only for their ruins to be buried, their memory erased, their story rewritten. And perhaps the greatest of these resets was the erasure of Tartaria. What could erase an empire that spanned continents, leaving behind architecture, maps and legends, but almost no record in the annals of history? It is not enough to say time. Time decays stone, but it does not rewrite every book. Time buries ruins, but it does not remove them from every map. No, to erase Tartaria required intention. It required a reset so total that it reached into the very fabric of our understanding. It was not only buildings destroyed, but knowledge buried. It was not only people displaced, but history itself rewritten. Consider the strange synchrony of global disasters, fires that raged through cities in the 18th and 19th centuries, conveniently destroying buildings that did not belong to their supposed time. Earthquakes that leveled entire regions, erasing traces of structures that could not be explained. Wars that tore down monuments while new governments rose to declare their own histories in their place. And always, after each disaster came the same story. Rebuilding, reconstruction, a chance to modernize. But hidden within this narrative of renewal is the eerie sense of a purge. The old world cleared away under the guise of progress. This is the essence of a reset, to remove inconvenient truths not through argument but through obliteration, to wipe the slate clean, not with ink but with fire, flood and war. And once the evidence is gone, the victors step forward to tell us who we are, who we were, and who we must never become again. The erasure of Tartaria fits this pattern too perfectly to ignore. Vast fires in cities like Chicago and San Francisco reduced entire districts of monumental architecture to ash, all conveniently blamed on simple accidents. Floods buried towns beneath layers of mud, leaving behind the eerie phenomenon we now call mud floods, windows and doors half buried in soil, entire lower levels of buildings hidden as if the earth itself rose overnight. Official accounts call it natural disaster, but is it natural or orchestrated? Because what these resets accomplish is always the same. They destroy the structures that reveal too much. They bury the architecture that doesn't belong to the timeline. They silence the whispers of a civilization that operated on principles we are no longer allowed to know. And, in their place, they leave us a curated history, one where progress is linear, slow, and always guided by those in power. The very concept of Tartaria challenges this curated history. If a vast empire once spanned continents, with advanced architecture, energy systems, and perhaps even global trade or travel, then the idea that human civilization has stumbled forward slowly, step by step, collapses. It suggests that we have fallen, not risen. that we have lost knowledge, not gained it, that the golden age is not ahead of us, but behind us, and someone has made sure we never look back far enough to find it. So what was the motive? Why erase Tartaria? Why reset the world so thoroughly that its existence is denied even today? Perhaps because a civilization that knew how to harness free energy, or one that built across continents with harmony and shared design, posed a threat to control. You cannot enslave a people who already live in abundance. You cannot govern those who no longer need governments to survive. To control humanity, you must sever its connection to freedom. You must convince it that progress is slow, that scarcity is natural, that dependence on authority is necessary. Tartaria was proof of the opposite, and so it was erased. But erasures are never perfect. The buildings remain, though many have been repurposed. The maps linger in forgotten archives, though they are dismissed. The legends survive in whispers, though they are ridiculed. Every reset leaves behind fragments, cracks in the facade, evidence that gnaws at the edges of the story we are told. And it is through those cracks that the truth begins to shine again. Because history is not only what is written, it is what refuses to be silenced. The Great Reset was not the end of Tartaria. It was the beginning of its ghost, haunting the cities we walk through, the monuments we admire, the maps we dismiss. A ghost that reminds us that what we call progress may in fact be a carefully curated illusion. Beneath our feet lies a mystery that most people never notice. You've seen it before without realizing. A building with its windows sunk below street level, a grand door that opens not onto a bustling avenue but into the earth itself. Whole floors buried in dirt, stone and mud. We are told these are basements. We are told the streets were raised. We are told it is all coincidence, explained away by clever urban planning or natural disaster. But what if the truth is far stranger? What if entire cities were swallowed by sudden waves of earth? What if they were buried alive? This is the enigma of the mud floods, and it may be the most visible evidence of a civilization deliberately hidden. Walk through the streets of old European cities, or wander past historic architecture in America, and the signs are there. Windows half buried, their tops peeking just above the soil, arched entryways that sink into the ground, staircases that descend into what is now called a basement, but once may have been the ground floor. These are not isolated cases. From Paris to St. Petersburg, from Boston to Istanbul, the phenomenon repeats itself. It is global, and it begs the question, if these buildings were designed to be above ground, how did they end up submerged beneath layers of earth? The official narrative is unsatisfying. Historians blame centuries of accumulated soil, gradual changes in terrain, or hasty urban expansions that required raising roads. But does this explain the uniformity? Does it explain entire districts where dozens of buildings appear swallowed, their lower halves trapped in mud? Does it explain why so many of these buried structures belong to the same architectural style, the same aesthetic we've already connected to Tartaria? Some propose a catastrophic event, a sudden flood not of water but of soil and silt, sweeping through regions and burying structures in a single moment of devastation. Geological upheaval, perhaps, or something more mysterious, an engineered disaster designed not just to destroy but to bury, because what better way to erase evidence of a civilization than to entomb its architecture, hiding it in plain sight beneath the very ground we walk on? Look closely at the details of these buried buildings. The basement windows are often ornately decorated, as if they were meant to be admired. The doors are grand, carved and framed as though they were entrances, not afterthoughts. No builder would lavish such care on spaces never meant to be seen. These were ground floors, meant to welcome citizens, now smothered under layers of history. And here lies the deeper question. If these mud floods were real, if they swallowed cities, then what happened to the people who lived in them? Were they buried along with the architecture, their lives erased in an instant? Or were they survivors, forced to rebuild on top of the ruins, inheriting structures they can no longer explain. Perhaps this is why so many of the grandest buildings are said to have been constructed in remarkably short periods of time. Perhaps they were not built at all, perhaps they were uncovered, repurposed, and claimed as new. The mud flood phenomenon unsettles the foundations of history itself. It suggests that at some point within the last few centuries the world experienced a cataclysm or a purge that engulfed entire cities. And instead of preserving the memory of this event, the narrative was overwritten. Instead of teaching us what truly happened, we were handed stories of urban planning, of raised streets, of misinterpretations. And most of us accepted them, because the alternative is too strange, too vast, too threatening to the linear story we've been given. But if you stand before a half-buried cathedral, if you peer into a window that now opens into earth, if you run your hand across the brickwork of a wall clearly meant to be above ground, the evidence whispers back. It tells of a flood not of water but of silence, a burying not only of stone but of truth, a cover-up layered in soil. Perhaps the mud floods were the great equalizer. Perhaps they were the final stroke in a reset that destroyed Tartaria's world and prepared the ground for the story we are told today. Or perhaps they were something else entirely, a force of nature we no longer understand, a cycle of the earth itself, sweeping away civilizations at intervals too immense for our narrow timelines. In dusty archives and forgotten libraries there exist maps that should not exist, maps that chart lands before they were discovered, maps that depict mountain ranges long before explorers claimed to have seen them, maps that sketch entire civilizations we are told never existed at all. They are anomalies, glitches in the narrative, and for those willing to look closer, they may be the most damning evidence that the story of our past has been deliberately rewritten. Among these anomalies, the maps of Tartaria stand out like a beacon in the fog. The word appears again and again, scattered across globes, atlases, and maritime charts. Tartaria, sometimes spelled a little differently, sometimes spanning vast swathes of Eurasia, sometimes broken into regions, but always there, in maps from the 15th century, in maps from the 16th, the 17th, even the 18th and 19th centuries. Centuries of cartographers, scholars, and navigators all agreed there was an empire stretching across Siberia, Central Asia, and beyond. Yet open a modern textbook and it is gone, erased, labelled a myth. If it was a myth, why did so many mapmakers commit it to paper? These were not amateur scribblers working from rumour. These were respected cartographers, men tasked with guiding explorers across oceans and traders across continents. Accuracy was survival. And yet, they all included Tartaria. Were they all mistaken, or were they recording something their successors were told to forget? The maps themselves are haunting. Some show Tartaria as a vast northern empire, covering land from the Caspian Sea to the edges of the Pacific. Others mark its borders with names like Great Tartary or Independent Tartary. On some, Tartaria dwarfs the nations of Europe. Imagine growing up in that time, unrolling a map and seeing it there, massive, undeniable. How strange then that only a few generations later it vanished from the story altogether. The official narrative offers explanations, of course. Tartaria was simply a geographical term, they say, used by Europeans to describe unknown lands. It was a convenient label, nothing more. But why then do those same maps give the lands of Tartaria borders, cities, and even rulers? Why do they distinguish it from the kingdoms that supposedly lay within it? You don't grant titles and capitals to something you believe doesn't exist. And then there are the maps that don't just mark Tartaria's existence, but contain impossible knowledge. Consider the Piri Reis map of 1513, drawn on gazelle skin, showing parts of South America and Antarctica, centuries before they were officially charted, or the Mercator maps, with their strange depictions of the Arctic suggesting lands and seas we no longer recognize. Who gave them this information? What sources were they copying? Were these fragments of a much older knowledge passed down from a civilization wiped away in a reset? It is easy to dismiss one map as an error. It is harder to dismiss hundreds. Harder still to dismiss their consistency across cultures and centuries, and it becomes nearly impossible when you realize how quickly they disappeared. By the late 19th century, Tartaria had all but vanished from atlases. It was replaced, divided, renamed. The story shifted. Suddenly history spoke of Mongols and Siberians, of scattered tribes and vast empty wilderness, but never again of a unified empire. The cartographers stopped remembering, or perhaps were told to stop. The silence is deafening. A word once written across continents is now a footnote if mentioned at all. And yet, the maps remain. They cannot be burned out of every archive, erased from every collection. They whisper from the corners of forgotten libraries, reminding us that history is not as seamless as we are told. Reminding us that the past is malleable, rewritten not only by victors, but by those who control the ink. What does it mean that maps remembered Tartaria long after modern historians deny it? Perhaps it means that someone wanted us to forget. Perhaps the maps are fragments of a world before the reset, before the erasure, before the mud floods and the fires. Or perhaps they are proof of something older still, knowledge carried forward through time, handed down like a torch, waiting for someone to notice. Every map is more than lines on paper. It is a worldview, a declaration of what exists and what does not. When Tartaria vanished from maps, it did not vanish from the earth. It vanished from our collective consciousness. And that may have been the greatest cover-up of all. Across the world, in city after city, a pattern emerges. A grand fire, always catastrophic, always consuming not just houses but entire districts, wiping out cathedrals, government buildings and libraries. Again and again we are told it was an accident. A lantern tipped over, a stove left unattended, sparks from a careless worker. And yet, the scale of these fires is staggering, the timing suspicious, the aftermath too convenient. It begins to look less like coincidence, and more like a deliberate act of erasure. Think of Chicago, 1871. The Great Fire raged for 2 days, leveling thousands of buildings. It was said to have started in a barn. But in the chaos, entire neighborhoods of stone and brick vanished, structures that should not have burned so easily. Witnesses describe strange winds, the fire leaping unnaturally, as if driven by some unseen force. And what replaced the destroyed districts? A new city, rebuilt quickly with different architecture, different purpose. What had stood before was gone. Move east to Boston, 1872. Another inferno. Nearly 800 buildings destroyed, many of them ornate and grand. Again it was explained as chance, as human error. Yet many of those buildings belong to the same curious architectural style we've already linked to Tartaria. They were not wooden shacks waiting to burn. They were stone, granite, marble, and yet they fell. Was the fire simply misfortune, or was it opportunity? San Francisco, 1906. Officially it was the earthquake that caused the devastation, but the records tell another story. The quake struck, yes, but the fire that followed did the real damage. 90% of the city consumed in flames. What could not be toppled by nature was finished by fire, and afterward the city was rebuilt in modern styles, its strange and out-of-place architecture erased. The old world swept away. And it doesn't end there. Moscow's fire of 1812, London's fire of 1666, the great fires of Toronto, Vancouver, Detroit, Seattle, a chain of devastation stretching across continents. In each case, vast swaths of cities were reduced to ash, often leaving only foundations, often destroying records, often clearing away the very structures that raised questions about who truly built them. To call all of this coincidence strains belief. Fires happen, yes, but fires on this scale, so frequently, so conveniently erasing architecture and history, that did not fit the narrative. That demands suspicion. Who benefited from these fires? Who profited from the clean slate they provided? And why do so many of these disasters seem to mark the very moment when the old world was replaced with the new? There are whispers that these fires were not natural at all, that they were engineered, that technology capable of starting or spreading fire existed long before the public was allowed to know. Some point to descriptions of buildings exploding from within, flames igniting in multiple locations at once, entire blocks catching fire simultaneously. Others point to curious images of firefighters posing with strange hoses and machinery as though testing some experimental means of destruction. What we are left with is rubble, photographs of devastation, and stories that don't quite add up. What we are left with is the eerie sense that someone wanted these cities cleared, their mysterious buildings removed, their history buried beneath modern construction, and perhaps more importantly, their people displaced, their culture reset, their memory wiped clean. Imagine for a moment that you were part of a civilization erased by fire, your great halls, your cathedrals, your archives, all gone in the span of days. Your descendants inherit only stories of disaster, never suspecting that what truly burned was their past. And imagine that while you mourned, others rejoiced, seizing the cleared land, raising new monuments, shaping a new story, one where your people never existed at all. When we look at the pattern of great fires, we must ask ourselves, were they disasters of chance or weapons of history? Were they tragedies or tools? Because if the erasure of Tartaria was real, then the fires may have been its final act of concealment, the great purges of flame that finished what the mud floods began. And so, as we walk the streets of modern cities, we walk on ashes. We stroll past buildings that were chosen to survive, never realizing what was lost in the flames. The great fires, remembered as accidents, may in truth be among the most calculated cover-ups in human history. They called them orphans, lost children abandoned in need of homes. But when you begin to trace the scale of the orphan trains, the story grows unsettling. Between the mid-19th and early 20th centuries, hundreds of thousands of children, some estimates say over 200,000, were loaded onto trains and shipped across the United States. They were sent westward, scattered to strangers, absorbed into families that often knew nothing about them. It is presented as charity, as a great act of compassion in a time of poverty. Yet questions remain. Too many questions. Where did so many children come from? The official story claims they were abandoned in the streets of New York, Boston, Philadelphia, victims of overcrowded cities and desperate immigrants. But photographs from the time show something strange. The children don't all look impoverished or neglected. Many are dressed neatly, their faces composed, their eyes carrying the weight of something unspoken. They seem less like neglected waifs, and more like displaced people. A population quietly erased, scattered, assimilated. Some researchers whisper of a deeper story, that these children may have been the remnants of a wiped-out civilization, survivors of the fires, of the floods, of the resets. That the trains were not merely charity, but cleanup, a way of redistributing those who might have remembered Tartaria. The logistics alone are staggering. Entire trains filled with children carried thousands of miles, not just once but repeatedly for decades. If this was only poverty, why were so many children orphaned at once? Why did the numbers swell after disasters, the fires of Chicago, the San Francisco earthquake, the so-called natural calamities that leveled entire cities? Could these children have been the displaced sons and daughters of people whose very history was being erased? And then there is the language. In many accounts, these children were not simply called orphans, they were called foundlings, found, taken in, as though they had no past at all, no origin to claim. This erases their story, making them blank slates ready to be written into new families, new cultures, new beliefs. What better way to break the chain of memory than to scatter its keepers before they were old enough to speak it aloud? Think too of how these children were chosen. Farmers often came to the stations and selected them like labour. Line after line of boys and girls inspected, judged and handed off. Some accounts recall children being treated like workers rather than family, sent to toil in fields, their stories lost in the furrows of land that was itself newly claimed. Did these orphans ever speak of where they came from? Did anyone listen if they did? The photographs are haunting. Rows of children on the steps of brick orphanages waiting to be shipped out. Their gazes hold something we cannot quite name, confusion, sadness, perhaps the faint awareness that they were part of something larger. We look at them now and wonder if they were witnesses to the final dismantling of Tartaria. And perhaps most chilling of all is how few of their stories remain. Hundreds of thousands of children, yet so little is preserved. No great oral tradition carried forward, no great archive of memory. They were scattered so effectively that their identities dissolved. If they were the last threads of a forgotten empire, those threads were cut. What we are left with are the trains themselves. The knowledge that for decades a machinery of relocation took place on a scale hard to comprehend. A machinery that not only moved children but moved memory, dissolved culture, severed lineages. And when you see it through that lens, the orphan trains no longer look like a charitable mission. They look like a cover-up with human faces. What vanished along those tracks? What histories, what languages, what knowledge? Did those children carry songs, stories, or memories that would have revealed the truth of Tartaria? We may never know. They were scattered, absorbed, made to forget. And so the trains keep rolling in our imagination, iron wheels carrying away not just the bodies of children, but the last whispers of a world we were never meant to remember. A world silenced not only by fire and flood, but by the erasure of its very descendants. They called them celebrations of progress, the world's fairs, grand exhibitions of culture, science and industry. Cities across the globe erected entire temporary metropolises to host them. Vast halls, intricate palaces, towers that touch the sky, canals and gardens and monuments. Millions attended, dazzled by the scale, the beauty, the promise of modernity. But when you look closer, the story grows stranger. The buildings, some of the most extraordinary ever constructed, were said to be temporary. Built of plaster, wood and staff, decorated facades meant to impress for a season, then torn down. And yet, photographs reveal architecture of impossible scale. Domes that rival St. Peter's Basilica, columns reminiscent of Rome, archways so massive, so intricate, they appear eternal. Could such wonders really have been erected in just months? And why destroy them immediately after? The 1893 Chicago World's Fair is one of the most famous examples. Known as the White City, it rose out of the ashes of the Great Fire. Dozens of colossal buildings, laid out with near-perfect geometry, surrounding grand lagoons. It looked less like a temporary exhibition and more like the seat of an empire. Visitors were awestruck, and yet, within a few short years, almost all of it was gone. Burned, demolished, erased. The official story insists they were never meant to last. But why would anyone create such marvels, only to erase them? Then came the Paris Expositions, the St. Louis Fair, the San Francisco Panama Pacific Exposition. Each time, entire districts appeared seemingly overnight. Each time they featured architecture too advanced, too refined to have been constructed so quickly. Each time they were destroyed, leaving behind only photographs, postcards, and puzzled questions. Some researchers whisper that these fairs were not merely exhibitions, they were cover-ups. That the organizers didn't build these cities from scratch, they inherited them. Leftover fragments of Tartaria, repurposed, rebranded as modern creations, shown off as proof of progress, and then conveniently demolished before anyone could ask too many questions. Look closely at the visitors in the photographs. Families strolling through colonnades that rivaled the temples of antiquity. Children gazing up at spires and domes that would dwarf any building around them today. They are not marvelling at papier-mâché facades. They are standing in something solid, something real, something that feels like it belonged to another world entirely. And then consider the strange uniformity of these fairs. Wherever they occurred, the style was the same: neoclassical domes, columns, arches, as though pieces of a larger architectural system were being revealed one fair at a time. If they were all designed locally by different architects, why did they all look as though they belonged to the same civilization? Unless they did. The fairs also had another curious element, so-called ethnological villages, human exhibits displaying primitive peoples from distant lands. Was this part of the cover-up, a way of cementing the narrative of progress? To contrast the grandeur of the buildings, possibly inherited from Tartaria, with carefully staged displays of supposed savagery, ensuring visitors walked away convinced of their own modern superiority. And then there are the fires, always the fires. The Chicago Fair's grand buildings burned, the San Francisco Exposition structures burned. Again and again, fire is the final answer to inconvenient architecture. A neat and thorough destruction, always explained, always accepted, always final. So we must ask ourselves, were these World's Fairs truly celebrations of invention, or were they the great recycling of a forgotten empire's remains? Were we shown the wonders of a past civilization, disguised as our own creations and then robbed of them forever? Today, when we look at the few surviving buildings from these fairs, the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, the Palace of Fine Arts in San Francisco, they stand as lonely reminders of something far greater. Monuments not to progress, but to erasure. Because if the World's Fairs were indeed showcases of Tartaria's remnants, then millions of people unknowingly walked through the ruins of a lost empire, dazzled, distracted and deceived, while history was rewritten around them. And when the crowds went home, the wrecking crews and fires arrived, the curtains closed, the stage was dismantled, and what was left was only the narrative, that these wonders had been fleeting, that they belonged to us, and that nothing lay behind them but imagination. But imagination is not what built domes of stone and towers of marble. Imagination does not raise palaces only to erase them. Something more was at work, something hidden, something covered up. Maps are not just tools for navigation. They are stories. They tell us who belongs where, what lands exist, what kingdoms rise and fall. They shape our understanding of the world, and with that power they can just as easily hide as reveal. When we study old maps, centuries before modern borders, we find something curious, something missing today. A land called Tartaria. Tartaria, sometimes sprawling across Eurasia in massive letters, appeared on maps for generations. From the 16th to the 18th century, map makers from Europe, Asia, and even the Americas included it. Sometimes it stretched across Siberia, sometimes it reached deep into Central Asia, sometimes it was marked with cities, rivers, even distinct regions. It was not a vague mystery to them. It was real, it was vast, and it was acknowledged. And then, suddenly, it wasn't. By the 19th century, Tartaria began to shrink on maps, fading from large bold names into smaller print, relegated to obscure corners. By the 20th century, it had disappeared altogether, replaced by Russia, Mongolia, China. The name erased, the empire forgotten, its memory dissolved into nothing more than a footnote. Why? The defenders of the official record say it was nothing mysterious. They claim Tartaria was never an empire at all, merely a catch-all term Europeans used for unfamiliar lands. A mistake, a misunderstanding. But if that were true, why did they draw cities there? Why mark capitals? Why name rivers? Why were so many maps so consistent in their depiction? And what does it mean when suppression of maps coincides with suppression of memory? We know the 18th and 19th centuries saw massive upheavals, wars, revolutions, fires, floods. Entire populations were displaced, orphaned, erased. Could the erasure of Tartaria from maps be part of the same pattern? Not just an error corrected, but a world rewritten. Think of the power a map holds. A child grows up looking at it and believes this is the world. Nations that exist on paper exist in their mind. Nations erased from paper vanish from imagination. To erase a map is to erase a civilization's right to memory. It is the neatest, most effective cover-up imaginable. And then there is the matter of those who kept the maps. In private collections, in forgotten archives, in dusty libraries, these documents survive. They tell a different story from the one we are taught. They show a world where Tartaria was not just a word but a reality, a world where history is bigger, stranger, older than we allow ourselves to admit. Some researchers believe these maps are keys, that if we trace the lines, the cities, the rivers, once marked as Tartarian, we may uncover ruins, artifacts, whispers of a lost civilization. Others suspect the suppression of maps is tied to the suppression of technology, that Tartaria was not just a land but a keeper of knowledge too advanced for its time. Knowledge that had to be buried if the new rulers of history were to assert control. Because maps do not only show territory, they show legacy, and legacy is dangerous when it belongs to those you want forgotten. It is worth noting how new maps emerged as old ones were suppressed. Suddenly the world was carved into modern nations, often drawn by colonial powers, often with little care for the people who lived there. Erasure of Tartaria made way for expansion, made way for Russia's rise, for China's consolidation, for the carving of Central Asia into the puzzle we know today. What disappeared was not only a name, but the possibility of a different story. A story where perhaps there was once a great northern empire, vast and mysterious, with architecture and technology we still struggle to explain. A story that threatened the official narrative of progress, of nation-states, of who owns what. And so the maps were redrawn, the ink dried, and the past was sealed beneath new borders. Today, when we look at those old maps, there is a haunting sense of something we're not supposed to see. Vast letters spelling Tartaria across continents, symbols of capitals long erased, pathways that no longer exist. And we are left to wonder, how many maps were burned, how many hidden, how many quietly altered until only the official story remained. Because in the end, history is not just written by the victors, it is mapped by them. And when they erased Tartaria from the maps, they did not just remove a name, they removed a memory, a people, perhaps an entire empire, leaving us with the silence so complete most never even think to ask the question, what was here before? They tell us history is shaped by disaster, that fire, flood, quake and storm have always swept across our world with merciless force, destroying the old and making way for the new. But sometimes, when you look closer, when you notice the timing, the pattern, the precision, the disasters of the past begin to feel less like accidents and more like design. The 18th and 19th centuries in particular were a world of fire. Cities burned with alarming frequency. Entire districts turned to ash. Libraries gone. Cathedrals reduced to rubble. Archives consumed in flames. Chicago in 1871. San Francisco in 1906. Moscow in 1812. Constantinople, time and time again. Even whole swaths of London. Fires that seem to erupt not only in moments of conflict but in moments of transition, when old systems were collapsing, when new powers were rising, when history itself was being rewritten. And curiously, what burned most often were not the wooden shacks, the poor dwellings, the places we might expect. What burned were palaces, halls, monuments, the very architecture that might have stood as proof of something older, something different. And when they fell, the story was always the same. They were replaced by newer, simpler, more modern structures. The evidence of the past erased, neatly, thoroughly. Consider the Chicago fire. The official account says a cow kicked over a lantern, and yet in 2 days nearly 4 square miles of the city were gone. Buildings of brick, stone and steel reduced to smouldering ruin. And in the ashes, what arose was not the same city but a new one, rebranded as a triumph of modern architecture. But what exactly was destroyed? What older buildings, what relics of a forgotten past might have been swept away under the guise of disaster? San Francisco tells a similar story. The 1906 earthquake was catastrophic, yes, but the fires that followed did even more damage. They were allowed to burn block after block until much of the city was gone. Photographs from before the disaster show grand structures, domes, colonnades, architecture reminiscent of old Europe, but supposedly built in the wild American West. Afterward, the city was rebuilt in simpler form, its old character gone. Was this merely bad luck? Or was it an opportunity, a chance to wipe the slate clean, to erase inconvenient structures, to reshape memory? And it wasn't only in America. Across Europe, Asia, even the Middle East, fires struck with uncanny timing. Moscow burned as Napoleon advanced. Constantinople burned so many times it seemed cursed, each time losing pieces of its ancient grandeur. Even smaller cities, barely remembered today, were gutted by flames that erased their oldest districts. But then we noticed something more subtle. Fires weren't the only disasters. Floods swept away archives, earthquakes toppled cathedrals, wars accidentally destroyed libraries. How many times has knowledge been lost not because of negligence but because someone wanted it gone? The Library of Alexandria is only the most famous example, but even in the modern age, fires in government buildings, in museums, in archives, have conveniently removed records that contradicted the official story. Was this all coincidence? Perhaps. Yet the pattern is too precise, too targeted. The disasters come when a change is needed, when a narrative must be reshaped. They come when inconvenient remnants of the past risk revealing themselves, and afterward the rebuilding is celebrated as progress, even though it is built on ashes. And so we are left with questions. Were the fires that swept the world merely disasters, or were they designs? Were they natural catastrophes, or the greatest cover-ups in history? Because when you look closely, it seems that again and again the flames fell not on the ordinary, but on the extraordinary, not on the fragile, but on the monumental, not on the forgettable, but on the unforgettable. And if that is the case, then our history is not just marked by fire. It is written in it. The flames have erased what we were never meant to see, and what remains are ruins, ashes, and the carefully constructed story left behind. But the past has a way of leaving traces, buried photographs, forgotten drawings, strange reports in yellowed newspapers. The clues survive, even if the buildings do not. And through them we begin to see a pattern, one that suggests that perhaps the greatest disasters of history were also the greatest designs. And if that is true, then every time we look at a fire, every time we are told of an earthquake, every time we are shown the ruins of something ancient and told it was chance, we must ask, was this really nature or was it erasure? History is filled with wars that shaped nations, battles that carved borders, conflicts that decided the fate of empires. At least that's what we are told. But what if some of these wars never happened? What if the pages of our history books contain phantom wars, conflicts exaggerated, manipulated, or even invented to serve a purpose? When we peel back the layers of historical accounts, contradictions begin to surface. A battle described in one chronicle is missing from another. A war that supposedly involved thousands leaves no trace in the archaeological record. Epic campaigns are recorded with grandeur, yet the land where they are said to have unfolded shows no scars of combat, no mass graves, no ruins of cities sacked and burned. It raises an unsettling possibility. Some wars may exist only in ink, not in blood. Take, for example, the so-called wars of succession that dot European history. Kings and dukes waged grand campaigns, we are told, armies clashing for the crown. And yet, in some cases, there are no artifacts, no battlefields, no graves to prove the losses of tens of thousands. Could it be that these wars were not fought on the ground, but on paper, manufactured by scribes to legitimize a ruler's claim, to explain a sudden shift in power, to cover a coup with the illusion of grandeur? Even more mysterious are the wars that appear once in history and then vanish without explanation. Entire campaigns said to last years are reduced to a few vague lines in the records. No surviving weapons, no detailed accounts of strategy, no songs of triumph or mourning passed down in the culture. Just a ghost of a war, an echo of conflict meant to fill a gap in the narrative. Consider also the way empires justified their conquests. A war against a barbarian horde was often the story told to explain territorial expansion. Yet when we look closely, sometimes those hordes leave no trace. No culture, no ruins, no distinct artifacts. Were these enemies real, or were they invented enemies, constructed so that kings and emperors could take land under the guise of victory? Then there are the battles that are described with such detail that they seem beyond doubt, until we realize that the sources all trace back to one scribe, one chronicle, one convenient record written decades or centuries after the fact. When the same event is not independently recorded elsewhere, we are left to wonder, did the battle occur at all, or was it the creation of a pen-serving power? The absence of evidence is not always evidence of absence, but when wars supposedly killed thousands, toppled cities, and redrew maps, we should expect something. Ruins, bones, weapons buried in the earth. And when those things never appear, we are left with shadows, stories, legends masquerading as fact. What purpose would such phantom wars serve? Power thrives on narrative. A ruler who seizes the throne through bloodless intrigue may invent a glorious war to paint himself as a hero. A kingdom that swallows its neighbor may claim to have fought a noble battle rather than admit to quiet annexation or economic takeover. Wars can be used to erase people too. Claim a tribe was wiped out in a great battle and suddenly their disappearance from the record is explained, their existence reduced to a casualty of war that may never have happened. And perhaps most chilling of all, phantom wars serve to unite populations. A people rallied around a story of shared struggle, of victory or defeat, are bound together. Whether the war was real or not, matters less than the effect of the tale, and once belief takes hold, it becomes indistinguishable from truth. Imagine then how many of our histories may be built on such illusions, how many borders were justified by wars that never happened, how many heroes rose to fame through victories fought only on parchment, how many cultures vanished not because they were conquered, but because they were written out of existence with a stroke of a pen. If even a handful of our wars were phantom wars, then the foundation of history itself is unstable. We must ask ourselves, when we read of grand campaigns and decisive battles, did this really happen, or is it one more carefully constructed illusion? All through history there are whispers of machines that should not exist, devices, engines, and artifacts that seem to belong not to their age, but to centuries or even millennia later. They are dismissed as curiosities, as mistakes, as hoaxes. But what if they are not mistakes at all? What if they are traces of hidden technologies deliberately buried, erased, or rewritten into legend so that we might never know how advanced the ancient world truly was? Consider the Antikythera mechanism discovered in the wreckage of an ancient Greek ship. A corroded lump of bronze that once examined revealed itself to be a complex gear-driven computer. It could predict eclipses. It could map planetary movements. It was, by all accounts, centuries ahead of its time. And yet, history insists that such technology should not have existed until at least the Middle Ages. How did it come to be? And why was it lost, as though someone had taken care to ensure it would never be replicated? Then there are the Baghdad batteries, small clay jars sealed with copper and iron that appear capable of generating an electric current. If true, then ancient Mesopotamians may have harnessed electricity long before modern science discovered it. What might they have powered? Lamps that burned without oil, tools that could cut with precision, knowledge that was later stripped from their legacy so the world would believe in a slower, simpler progression of technology. And what are the ancient carvings in Egypt where some claim to see helicopters, submarines and aircraft etched into stone? Mainstream scholars dismiss them as coincidences or eroded hieroglyphs, but to the careful eye they raise an unsettling possibility that the ancients had knowledge of flight, of mechanics, of engineering far beyond what is accepted. Was it memory? Was it invention? Or was it truth carefully encoded in stone, only to be explained away centuries later? Even stranger are the so-called Vimanas of ancient India, flying chariots described in epic texts, machines said to soar through the skies powered by unknown engines. Scholars interpret them as myth, as poetic metaphor. But what if they were not? What if they were descriptions of real craft long hidden from human memory? If so, then the ancients may have not only dreamed of flight, but achieved it, centuries before modern planes touched the skies. There are also out-of-place artifacts, ooparts as they are often called, that defy explanation. Tiny golden figures from South America, shaped unmistakably like airplanes. Drill bits embedded in solid rock, supposedly millions of years old. Geometric carvings found deep underground, where no human hand should have reached. Each one an impossibility, each one quietly brushed aside. For if such things are real, they unravel the story of technological progress as we have been taught. And this is perhaps the heart of the mystery. Progress, we are told, is linear. Humanity crawls from stone tools to bronze, from bronze to iron, from horse-drawn cart to steam engine, from steam to electricity, from electricity to digital age. But what if that story is a fabrication? What if the real story is cyclical? Civilizations rising to extraordinary heights of technology, only to collapse, leaving fragments scattered in ruins. And what if those fragments are deliberately hidden, destroyed, or ridiculed so that we never realize how much has been lost? Why would this be done? Power rests on the control of knowledge. If the public knew that ancient civilizations possess machines as advanced or more advanced than our own, the illusion of our modern superiority would shatter. Entire industries, entire institutions would be undermined. Progress would no longer belong to the present, it would belong to the past. So instead, the evidence is erased. The artifacts dismissed as fakes, the discoveries locked away in museum basements, the anomalies rewritten as myths, and what little survives is carefully explained in ways that fit the official story. But even with these efforts, the traces remain. A mechanism in a shipwreck, a battery in a clay jar, a carving on a temple wall, a golden figure that looks too much like a jet, a passage in an ancient text that sounds too much like an engineer's description. The pieces are still there, scattered, waiting for us to see them for what they are. And once we do, the question becomes impossible to ignore. How many other machines, how many other technologies have been hidden from us? How many inventions that could change everything were already known thousands of years ago, only to be buried beneath centuries of silence? Perhaps the greatest cover-up of all is not just history itself. It is the erasure of human genius, the denial that we have been here before, the refusal to admit that we may not be the first advanced civilization to walk the earth. Maps are more than tools. They are mirrors of what a civilization knows, and sometimes what it should not. To open an ancient map is to open a doorway into forgotten knowledge, a glimpse of the world as it was once seen. But every so often we stumble upon a map that does not fit, a map that charts lands it should not know, a coastline drawn centuries before explorers arrived, a continent detailed long before the world believed it existed. These maps that shouldn't exist are perhaps some of the most haunting pieces of evidence that history, as we've been told, is incomplete. Take the Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral. On its yellowed surface, the familiar coastlines of Europe and Africa appear. But at the bottom lies something startling: Antarctica. Not only shown centuries before its official discovery in the 1800s, but drawn without the ice sheet that now buries it. How could this be? For some, the only explanation is that Admiral Reis had access to older, far more ancient source maps, inherited from civilizations whose knowledge has long been erased, civilizations who mapped the Earth with a precision we are only now beginning to reclaim. Orseus's maps of the world present another puzzle. On them, vast lands stretch where oceans should be. Rivers flow through regions thought to be barren. Islands appear in the Atlantic that are no longer there. Were these mistakes? Guesses? Or were they fragments of real knowledge passed down from an earlier age when the world looked different, when sea levels, climates, and coastlines had not yet shifted? Then there are the so-called portolan charts, medieval maps etched with uncanny accuracy. Harbours, coastlines, and trade routes sketched with a detail that would have required satellite-level surveying. Historians insist they were crafted by skilled navigators of the Middle Ages. Yet when scrutinized, the precision seems impossible without modern tools. Could these maps be copies of something older, something drawn by hands long before our own? Even more mysterious are the maps that suggest human beings once circumnavigated the globe thousands of years before the age of exploration. Some contain the outline of South America centuries before Europeans reached its shores. Others depict the Pacific with islands scattered just as they are. And then there are maps that seem to show the world as if from above, as if seen not by sailors charting coastlines, but from a vantage point high above the earth. Mainstream historians dismiss these anomalies as coincidence, artistic license, or flawed interpretation. And yet, when the same patterns repeat across centuries and continents, the explanation begins to ring hollow. If it were chance, why do so many maps depict things their creators could not possibly have known? The implications are staggering. If ancient civilizations possessed the ability to map the world with such accuracy, then they must have had technologies, ships, or knowledge far beyond what is recorded. They may have sailed to Antarctica before it froze. They may have measured coastlines with instruments we cannot find. They may have inherited a knowledge of the earth that was handed down, generation after generation, until it finally slipped through the cracks of memory. And perhaps most disturbing, we must ask, why do these maps survive only in fragments? Why is it that entire libraries of knowledge are lost to fire, war, or disappearance, while just enough remains to remind us of what has been hidden? The Peri race map survives in part, not whole. Many others exist only in copies or fragments, almost as if someone made sure we would see just enough to question, but never enough to know the full truth. Maps that shouldn't exist are not just curiosities. They are challenges. They force us to confront the possibility that history is cyclical, that explorers existed long before Columbus, long before Magellan, long before the empires of Europe began their global reach, that civilizations rose, charted the world, and then fell, leaving only these mysterious echoes behind. When we look at them, we are left with questions that linger like shadows. Who charted these coastlines? Who knew Antarctica before the ice? Who passed down these fragments of knowledge across the centuries? Deep beneath the sands of Egypt, the desert hides more than just dust and stone. It hides secrets. Secrets of kings, of dynasties, of rulers whose very names have been swallowed by time. We are told that the pharaohs of Egypt were buried in great pyramids, in lavish tombs, in chambers filled with gold to carry them into eternity. And yet, so many of those tombs are empty. So many pharaohs' resting places have never been found. It is as if entire dynasties simply vanished into the desert without leaving a trace. Consider the grandeur of the Valley of the Kings. Here, deep in the cliffs, lie the remains of rulers whose power once stretched across the ancient world. But for every tomb discovered, for every chamber cracked open, countless more are missing. Pharaohs we know existed, through inscriptions, through records, through references, have no graves. Their final resting places are absent, as though deliberately hidden from the eyes of history. Some say their tombs are still buried, waiting for archaeologists to stumble upon them. But is it possible that these tombs were erased on purpose, that their very existence was scrubbed from memory? Because to erase a tomb is not just to hide a body, it is to destroy a legacy. The Egyptians believed that memory itself was a form of immortality. To erase a name, to bury a tomb so deeply it could never be found, was to condemn a soul to oblivion. And yet across Egypt we find scattered traces, tomb shafts leading nowhere, inscriptions cut off mid-sentence, burial sites so hastily covered that it seems someone feared what they might reveal. Were these unfinished works of nature, Or were they censored, sealed away to prevent truths too dangerous to survive? Take Akhenaten, the pharaoh who dared to worship a single god, discarding the pantheon of Egypt. After his death, his city was abandoned, his statues smashed, his name chiseled from monuments. His tomb remains shrouded in mystery, never properly identified, as if his entire existence was meant to be erased. And with him, perhaps others, rulers who carried ideas that threatened the established order, wiped out not only in life but in death as well. Even more haunting are the whispers of entire chambers beneath the pyramids themselves, secret tombs of forgotten kings hidden by design. The Great Pyramid, towering and silent, may not simply be a monument. Some believe it contains rooms never opened, shafts that lead to places never seen. Advanced scanning has shown anomalies, voids deep within the stone, that suggest hollow spaces untouched for thousands of years. Are these hidden tombs, or are they something else entirely, knowledge sealed within stone for reasons we cannot yet comprehend? And then there are the pharaohs whose remains have been found, but whose tombs were stripped clean, as if robbed not by chance thieves, but by deliberate, organized hands. What treasures were taken? What inscriptions erased? What truths buried in the sand so that the story of Egypt would be rewritten, reshaped to fit a narrative chosen by those who came after? To stand in the desert with the wind sweeping over dunes is to realize how much may still be hidden. Beneath the shifting sands lie entire cities, entire cemeteries, entire dynasties lost to time. And yet, for every discovery, there is always the echo of absence, the kings whose tombs remain missing, whose names have been silenced. Perhaps the question is not simply why we have not found them. Perhaps the question is, were we ever meant to? Was their erasure intentional, part of a cover-up stretching back thousands of years, designed to keep their stories from reaching us? Because when we dig into the earth, we do not just uncover bones and stone, we uncover truths. And sometimes those truths are dangerous, dangerous enough that someone long ago decided they should never again see the light. In the misty landscapes of ancient Britain, long before Rome stretched its empire across the land, there existed a people whose knowledge and power rivaled kings. They were the Druids, priests, judges, healers, and keepers of sacred wisdom. Their presence once shaped tribes and nations, their rituals bound to the earth, the stars, and the unseen forces that flowed through both. Yet today, their voices are silent, their libraries are gone, their wisdom has dissolved into rumor and shadow. What remains of the Druids is a void, stories told by their enemies, fragments whispered through the centuries, and stones that stand mute against the sky. The Druids themselves never wrote their knowledge down. They believed that sacred wisdom was too powerful to be captured in ink. Instead, it was carried in memory, in songs, in chants spoken beneath oaks and across stone circles. Knowledge was passed from teacher to student, often requiring decades of learning. To become a Druid meant absorbing astronomy, mathematics, medicine, law, and mysteries of the soul. But when Rome came, swords in hand and empire in mind, the Druids became enemies of order. Their very existence was a threat, because they were not just priests, they were keepers of an older truth. Julius Caesar himself wrote of them. He described their vast knowledge, their study of the stars, their understanding of the afterlife. He also described their power that lay not only in ritual but in influence. Tribes listened to Druids above kings, their word binding law and faith together. To an empire that sought to control through conquest, this was intolerable. So the Druids were hunted, their groves cut down, their sacred places desecrated. But the question remains, what was it Rome feared so much? Was it their rituals, whispered under oak trees at midnight? Was it their understanding of medicine, of herbs and poisons, of healing arts that seemed beyond their time? Or was it their knowledge of the cosmos, their ability to align stones with solstices, to predict eclipses, to weave human lives into the great cycles of the heavens? Stonehenge, with its perfect alignment, speaks of this knowledge. Though it predates the Druids, later traditions suggest they inherited its mysteries. Imagine ceremonies beneath the stones, robes flowing in the twilight, chants rising as the sun broke across the horizon in perfect alignment. These were not the acts of savages as Rome painted them, but of a culture deeply attuned to cosmic order. And yet, all traces of what they truly believed are gone. Did they guard secrets that challenge Rome's authority, secrets of power that could not be controlled by empire? Some accounts suggest the Druids held knowledge of reincarnation, of souls passing through lifetimes, like rivers flowing to the sea. Others claim they worked with forces of nature itself, harnessing energies that modern science still struggles to name. Their rituals, painted as barbaric sacrifices by Roman historians, may have been misunderstood or deliberately twisted to justify their extermination. What we know for certain is that the Druids' knowledge vanished almost completely. Was it destroyed outright, burned away in Rome's expansion? Or was it hidden, buried with them in sacred places, scattered through stone monuments, waiting for the right eyes to see? Because across Britain and Ireland, echoes of their wisdom still linger. In the cairns, in the circles, in the stories of the Sidhe and the old gods, there are fragments that refuse to die. To think of the Druids is to think of a doorway that was slammed shut. We sense that something was lost, something vast, something essential, but we cannot grasp it. Their secrets stand like Stonehenge itself, imposing, immovable, yet silent. And perhaps that silence is the greatest cover-up of all. Beneath the waves of myth, in the silent depths of the sea, lies a name that has haunted human imagination for millennia: Atlantis. It first appeared in the writings of Plato, who spoke of a great and powerful civilization that flourished long before Greece, only to vanish in a single day and night of catastrophe. A people advanced in knowledge, art, and architecture, swallowed by the ocean, erased as if they had never existed. For some, Atlantis is no more than a story, a fable of pride and downfall. But for others, it is the greatest cover-up of all, evidence of a lost chapter of human history hidden beneath our oceans. Plato described Atlantis in detail, far more detail than one would expect if it were merely allegory. He told of a vast island nation ringed by concentric canals filled with magnificent temples, markets, and palaces plated in precious metals. A civilization so advanced that it surpassed the powers of the known world. They harnessed knowledge of engineering, navigation, perhaps even energies that modern science struggles to explain, and yet in a single cataclysm they were gone. Skeptics claim Plato's story was metaphor, a warning against arrogance. But if that were so, why does the description align so closely with ruins we continue to find across the globe? From the sunken structures off the coast of Japan at Yonaguni, to the megaliths hidden beneath the waters of the Mediterranean, whispers of lost civilizations rise from the seabed. Could these be fragments of Atlantis, or at least of cultures erased in the same way? For centuries, explorers have searched for the lost city. Some place it in the Mediterranean, others in the Caribbean, still others under the ice of Antarctica. Each theory meets resistance, each discovery questioned, discredited, or dismissed. It is as if the world itself conspires to keep Atlantis in shadow, to prevent it from stepping into the realm of history. Because if Atlantis were proven real, everything we think we know about the dawn of civilization would collapse. The idea that humanity began with primitive tribes slowly stumbling toward progress would no longer hold. We would be forced to accept that there were once cultures more advanced than we dare imagine, cultures erased from our textbooks. But why would such knowledge be suppressed? Perhaps because Atlantis speaks to a dangerous truth, that human history is not a steady march upward but a cycle, that civilizations rise to heights of power and fall into ruin, only to be forgotten by those who come after. To acknowledge Atlantis is to admit that we may not be the first to walk this path of progress, that others have walked it before and vanished. Ancient maps like the Piri Reis chart show coastlines as they would have been before the last ice age, suggesting knowledge passed down from civilizations we cannot name. Myths from cultures across the world speak of floods, of sunken lands, of gods who once lived among men before a great cataclysm consumed them. Is it coincidence that so many stories echo the same tale, or are these the last fragments of a shared memory, scattered like breadcrumbs across humanity's collective past? Imagine what was lost if Atlantis was real. Libraries filled with knowledge beyond our comprehension, technologies capable of shaping stone with ease, of drawing power from the earth itself, an understanding of the cosmos so deep it would make our modern sciences seem like children's games. And imagine, too, why those who hold power today might not want such truths revealed. Because to reveal that we are not the pinnacle of history, but only one fragile step in a cycle, is to destabilize the very story civilization tells itself. The ocean keeps its secrets well. It covers the scars of continents, buries ruins beneath miles of water and silence. But every so often, fragments break the surface, sunken temples, impossible structures, forgotten maps. Each one whispers the same possibility, that Atlantis was real, and that its erasure was no accident. Perhaps one day the sea will give up its secrets, or perhaps Atlantis will remain what it has always been, a haunting absence, a silence that calls to us across the ages, a reminder that what we call history may be only a fraction of the truth, and that beneath the waves, humanity's greatest cover-up may still be waiting to rise. High in the stone walls of temples and carved into the relics of forgotten cities, strange images appear. Winged figures, curious machines, objects that resemble airplanes or rockets, etched thousands of years before the Wright brothers ever dreamed of flight. To the modern eye they are anomalies, dismissed as symbols, myths or coincidences. But to those who look deeper, these carvings whisper of a truth far more extraordinary. That ancient man once soared the skies, and that the secret of flight is older than we dare admit. In the jungles of Colombia, small gold artifacts have been unearthed. Known as the Tolima figurines, they are no larger than the palm of your hand. At first glance they seem to be birds or insects, but their shapes are strikingly mechanical: fuselages, wings, vertical stabilizers, even landing gear. When scale models of these figurines were built and tested in wind tunnels, they flew perfectly. Are we to believe that ancient craftsmen accidentally created designs indistinguishable from modern aircraft? Or were they imitating machines they had once seen in the sky? Egypt too holds its mysteries. In the temple of Seti at Abydos, hieroglyphs appear to show flying machines. What looks like a helicopter, an airplane, even a hovering craft. The official explanation is that these are palimpsests, layers of inscriptions carved over each other through time, creating accidental shapes. But the precision of these outlines has fueled endless speculation. Were the Egyptians recording more than just myths? Were they depicting something real? Legends across the world speak of flying beings, sky chariots, and gods who descended from above. In the Indian epics, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, there are vivid descriptions of vimanas, flying palaces and machines that move through the heavens powered by unknown forces. They battled in the sky, they carried kings across continents, they moved between earth and stars. For centuries these stories were read as allegory, yet the detail is so mechanical, so technical, that many wonder if they describe technology long since lost. Imagine what it would mean if ancient civilizations had mastered flight, not the fragile wooden gliders of early modern attempts, but true machines, powered craft capable of crossing oceans, of linking empires, of collapsing the vastness of the world into a single network. What knowledge would that demand? Advanced metallurgy, mathematics, an understanding of lift and propulsion, all far beyond what mainstream history allows for these cultures. If they possess such knowledge, where did it go? The standard answer is that it never existed, that these carvings and artifacts are misinterpretations, products of imagination, coincidence. But what if that answer is itself the cover-up? What if the disappearance of ancient flight was deliberate, knowledge guarded by a few, erased from the hands of the many, locked away until only symbols remained. The thought lingers. If humanity once soared, what brought it back down to earth? Did a cataclysm wipe away both cities and machines, drowning fleets of sky chariots along with the libraries that recorded them? Did powerful priesthoods or ruling classes decide to suppress this technology, fearing the freedom it would bring to ordinary people? Or did these machines not belong to humans at all, but to beings worshipped as gods, beings whose departure left us clutching only myths? The silence of the skies after such wonders would have been deafening. Imagine a world where once the hum of engines echoed across valleys, replaced suddenly by the rustle of leaves and the cry of birds. A world stripped of wings, forced to walk once more. For thousands of years, humanity may have carried fragments of memory, whispering them into carvings and stories so that they would not be lost entirely. Today, we chase flight with metal and fire, proud of our achievement. But in the carvings of stone and the gold of forgotten craftsmen, there is a hint that we may only be relearning what was already known. If that is true, then flight is not just a triumph of the modern age, it is a memory. And that memory raises a dangerous question. If ancient man once soared above the earth, what else did he know that has been taken from us? The skies remain silent, the carvings remain, and we, bound to our history books, are left to wonder whether the greatest cover-up of all is not that humanity invented flight in the 20th century, but that we had it once before, and lost it. In the long corridors of Egyptian history, dynasties rise and fall like the flooding of the Nile. Pharaohs are remembered in stone, their names carved deep into temples, their faces immortalized in colossal statues. Yet there is one ruler whose presence feels more like an absence, Akhenaten. The pharaoh who dared to worship one god in a world of many, who tried to reshape the spiritual order of Egypt itself, and whose memory was nearly erased from history. His name was chiseled out, his images defaced, his story buried in silence. And the question still lingers. Why? Akhenaten began as Amenhotep IV, a king of the 18th dynasty. At first his reign seemed ordinary, bound to tradition, tied to the gods that had guided Egypt for centuries. But then something changed. He proclaimed that there was only one true God, the Aten, a radiant sun disk that gave life to all. He closed temples to the old gods, stripped priests of their power, and built a new capital city in the desert, Akhetaten, devoted solely to the worship of the singular deity. It was a revolution, not just of religion but of power itself. Imagine Egypt in that moment, a civilization defined by its pantheon suddenly reduced to one symbol. Priests of Amun, once the most powerful class in the land, suddenly cast aside. The traditions of centuries dissolved in favor of a radical vision. Art itself transformed under Akhenaten's rule. Gone were the rigid, idealized forms of kingship. In their place, he was shown with elongated features, wide hips, and almost alien proportions. The royal family was portrayed in intimate scenes, holding children, basking under the rays of the Aten. It was a vision unlike anything Egypt had ever seen. But revolutions do not last long when they cut so deep. After Akhenaten's death, his city was abandoned, his monuments destroyed, his god forgotten. The old priesthood returned, restoring the pantheon, reinstating Amun as king of the gods. His successor, some say his son, was Tutankhamun, the boy king whose tomb would one day capture the world's imagination. Tutankhamun's very name was a declaration that the old order was back, living image of Amun. And what of Akhenaten? His name was hacked out of inscriptions, his statue shattered, his memory condemned in an act known as damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. Egypt itself tried to forget him. For centuries they succeeded. It was not until the sands yielded his ruined city at Amarna that Akhenaten's ghost returned, whispering from the fragments of stone. Why such erasure? Perhaps it was simply vengeance from the priests, reclaiming the power that had been stripped from them. But perhaps it was something more. Was Akhenaten truly the world's first monotheist, anticipating religions that would dominate the globe centuries later? Was his vision not a blasphemy, but a glimpse into something greater, something that threatened the established powers so profoundly they had no choice but to bury it? Some scholars have even suggested that Akhenaten was not merely radical but chosen, that his devotion to the Aten was not invention but revelation. His strange depictions, elongated skull, narrow limbs, have fueled speculation of an otherworldly connection. To some he was human, to others perhaps more. Could his insistence on one God have been born from knowledge he was not meant to share? The silence surrounding him is telling. Egypt had seen heretics before, yet none were erased with such fury. His city of Akhetaten was not merely abandoned, it was dismantled, its stones reused as if to wipe the slate clean. Even Tutankhamun, whose tomb was filled with treasures beyond imagination, carried artifacts that had once belonged to Akhenaten, his name crudely overwritten with another. It is as if history itself bent backward to cover its tracks, to ensure that Akhenaten's revolution lived only as a shadow, a ghost hidden behind layers of sand and silence. And yet, the truth lingers. In every scar where his name was removed, in every shard of pottery with his image still intact, in the uncanny art that bears his face. The very attempt to erase him makes him all the more haunting. Perhaps this is the true reason his memory was condemned, not because his God failed, but because his truth was too dangerous to survive, a truth that, if known, might have rewritten the entire story of human spirituality. Beneath the towering stones of the pyramid, silence lingers like a weight. These monuments, older than recorded memory, stand not only as tombs, but as puzzles. Their surfaces reveal grandeur, but it is what lies inside, or what may still be hidden, that keeps the world in awe. For centuries, explorers, scholars, and seekers have wandered their passageways, lighting the dark with torches, scanning with machines, and probing with instruments. Each time, whispers grow louder. There are chambers here we are not meant to see. The Great Pyramid of Giza is the most studied building in the world, yet it remains the least understood. Its vast corridors lead not to a single tomb, but to layers of rooms, shafts, and voids that defy simple explanation. For generations, archaeologists believed they had uncovered the essential spaces, the king's chamber, the queen's chamber, the subterranean chamber. But modern technology tells another story. In 2017, a group of scientists using cosmic ray imaging discovered something astonishing. A massive hidden void above the Grand Gallery, as large as an airplane hangar. A space untouched for more than 4,000 years, its purpose unknown. The announcement was met with awe, but also hesitation. Some hailed it as the greatest discovery of the century. Others downplayed it, saying it was nothing more than a structural cavity. Yet the silence that followed was louder than any explanation. The chamber has not been entered, no exploration, no release of data. Why? Consider the scale of what could lie behind sealed doors or blocked shafts. The Great Pyramid contains narrow passages that climb and fall, some leading to false ends, others abruptly stopping as though sealed deliberately. Tiny robotic explorers have crawled through them, finding mysterious copper handles, strange inscriptions, and blocks that seem placed to guard what is beyond. Each time, exploration halts. Each time, the trail goes cold. What if the pyramids are not merely tombs but repositories? Libraries of stone that guard secrets not meant for common eyes. Ancient texts speak of the Hall of Records, a chamber hidden beneath the paw of the Sphinx or within the pyramid itself, said to contain knowledge of humanity's forgotten past. If such a hall exists, it would rewrite history, exposing truths carefully kept from us. Could this be why these voids and chambers remain sealed? Even more unsettling are the accounts of explorers who claim to glimpse things never acknowledged by official archaeology. Chambers filled with inscriptions unlike anything found elsewhere. Walls blackened, not by torches, but by an ancient form of light. artifacts that vanished into silence before the world ever saw them. Too many stories end the same way: discovery, then disappearance, knowledge revealed, then erased. Why protect empty stone rooms? Why block access to voids if they are meaningless? The reluctance suggests the opposite, that something rests inside, something too profound or too dangerous to reveal. If the pyramids were meant as beacons of eternity, then perhaps what they hold is not a body, but a message, a warning, a key to technology and understanding far beyond what we imagine the ancients possessed. The thought itself is chilling. That chambers the world is forbidden to enter might contain the evidence of a forgotten civilization, or the proof that history as we know it has been rewritten. If so, then the silence of these voids is not absence but a cover-up, one of stone and secrecy, guarded by time and by those who fear the consequences of unveiling it. We walk past the pyramids as tourists, taking photographs of their weathered faces, never realizing how much of their story lies in shadow. These chambers are not empty, they are not irrelevant, they are questions sealed in stone, and until they are opened, humanity will live only on the surface of its own past. Egypt is called the land of eternity, a place where memory is carved into stone, and dynasties are preserved for all time. Pharaohs rise from the dust of the Nile, their names etched into temples, their lives recorded in hieroglyphs. Yet not all rulers were granted such immortality. Some vanished from history as though they had never lived. Entire dynasties whispered out of existence, their reigns erased, their legacies dismantled. These are the lost pharaohs, ghosts of power whose silence tells us as much as their absence. When we read the king lists left behind by the Egyptians themselves, something strange emerges. The lists are not consistent. In some, entire rulers are omitted. In others, names appear that do not exist anywhere else. Historians call this error or political revision. But what if it is something more? The deliberate concealment of rulers who did not fit the narrative, whose reigns threatened to reveal truths best forgotten. The 13th dynasty, for example, is a haze of confusion. Dozens of kings are mentioned in fragments, but their reigns are almost impossible to place. Some seem to overlap, others last only months, as though Egypt itself wanted their memory blurred. The Hyksos, foreign rulers who invaded and held power for a century, were later vilified, their names struck out, their story rewritten as a shameful chapter rather than a reality of Egypt's endurance. Yet they were pharaohs nonetheless. They ruled, they left monuments, and still history sought to erase them. Then there are figures like Akhenaten, whose vision of one god nearly reshaped Egypt. His name was condemned, his city destroyed, his memory silenced. If not for the ruins of Amarna, he too would have been lost. How many others were not so fortunate? How many rulers left no ruin, no scar, nothing at all but whispers erased from walls? Even Tutankhamun, the boy king whose tomb dazzled the world, may have been nearly forgotten. His name was removed from many lists. His burial was modest compared to others. His glory came not from Egyptian remembrance, but from modern discovery. How many other pharaohs lay in tombs still buried beneath the sands, names we may never know? Some believe that the lost pharaohs were erased not because of failure, but because of forbidden knowledge. That rulers who saw too far, who uncovered truths about the gods, the stars, or humanity's origins, were deliberately silenced by those who followed. Inscriptions were hammered away, statues mutilated, names left blank, a void carefully maintained, so the story of Egypt would remain intact, polished and controlled. And then there are the even darker possibilities, that the missing dynasties hint at rival civilizations who seized Egypt's throne, bringing with them knowledge from beyond the Nile. Their reigns ended, their memory extinguished, their trace eliminated so thoroughly that only fragments remain. Some connect this to the idea of Tartaria, or to civilizations predating Egypt itself, cultures whose fingerprints survive only in gaps, in erasures, in shadows. The sands themselves seem complicit in this forgetting, Tombs collapse, papyri rot, temples sink beneath desert storms, and each time a record is lost, a name is silenced once more. Perhaps the lost pharaohs are not just victims of deliberate erasure, but of time itself. Yet the precision of the omissions, the deliberate chiseling out of names, feels too intentional to dismiss. We must ask, what truths were they hiding? Were these rulers heretics, invaders, prophets, or simply inconvenient? And if Egypt, the land obsessed with eternity, worked so hard to erase them, then the answer must be something that shook the very foundation of power. For nothing is erased without reason. The pyramids stand in the sun, the temples still whisper their hymns, the names of Ramses, of Seti, of Hatshepsut endure. But behind them is a silence, a curtain carefully drawn, where the lost pharaohs remain. Their reigns may be gone from the record, but their absence speaks louder than their names ever could. They remind us that history is not only what is remembered, but what is deliberately forgotten. The story of Atlantis begins not with ruins, but with words. Plato the philosopher set it down more than 2,000 years ago, a tale of a mighty island nation, rich in knowledge, powerful in arms, dazzling in beauty. He described a civilization that rivaled all others, then sank beneath the waves in a single day and night of misfortune. To many, it was allegory. To others, it was memory disguised as myth. Yet across time, the silence surrounding Atlantis has been louder than its story. For what if Plato's tale was not invention but revelation? Scholars dismiss it as fantasy. They claim it is metaphor for greed or a political parable, but the details are too vivid, too precise. Plato described its geography, concentric rings of land and sea, canals carved with impossible skill, mountains that glittered with metals unknown to his age. He gave it rulers, armies, and fleets. He placed it beyond the Pillars of Hercules in the Atlantic Ocean. These were not the flourishes of a simple fable. They were the details of memory or testimony. And here lies the mystery. If Atlantis never existed, why do echoes of its story surface in myths across the world? Cultures from the Americas to the Mediterranean to Asia all whisper of a lost land drowned by catastrophe. Flood myths appear again and again, of deluges that wiped away whole civilizations, of gods who destroyed worlds to build new ones. Is Atlantis not unique but part of a shared memory of humanity's forgotten past? Modern researchers who seek Atlantis are ridiculed, their work branded pseudo-history. Yet satellite images of the ocean floor reveal strange formations. Ancient maps drawn long before exploration depict lands where none now exist. The Riche structure in the Sahara, known as the Eye of Africa, resembles Plato's description almost perfectly, a vast circle of land and water that seems misplaced in the desert. Could this be the bones of the lost city, swallowed not by sea but by time and sand? Other theories speak of islands swallowed by volcanic fire, Santorini, Thera, or Crete, whose Minoan civilization collapsed in sudden violence. But if this were the case, why bury the story under layers of dismissal? Why treat Atlantis as myth and nothing more? Perhaps because acknowledging it opens doors that history is not prepared to enter. If Atlantis existed, then advanced civilizations walk the earth long before our accepted timelines allow. Civilizations capable of engineering, of astronomy, of seafaring across oceans. Civilizations erased. There are whispers too of forbidden knowledge, of technologies carried from Atlantis that seeded later empires, echoes in Egypt, in Mesopotamia, in Mesoamerica, legends of survivors who spread across the globe, bringing with them skills that should not have existed. If true, it would mean the greatest cover-up in history is not the destruction of Atlantis itself, but the denial of its survivors' legacy. Why does the academic world guard so fiercely against the possibility? Perhaps because to admit Atlantis existed is to admit we are not the pinnacle of human history, that what we call progress is rediscovery, not invention, that the cycle of rise and fall is far older and far more mysterious than we dare to believe. Imagine the halls of Atlantis, gleaming with metals that shimmered like fire. Imagine its canals flowing with ships, its temples crowned with gold. Imagine knowledge carved into walls, knowledge that if rediscovered, could transform the world again. And then imagine it all erased, not by nature alone, but by the silence of scholars, the refusal of history to grant it even a chance to exist. Atlantis may lie at the bottom of the sea, it may hide in the desert, it may never have been a single place, but a memory of many civilizations destroyed by floods and flames. Yet its greatest tragedy is not its fall, but its erasure. For if we were allowed to search without ridicule, without dismissal, perhaps we would find that the myth is not a myth at all. The silence around Atlantis is deliberate, and in that silence perhaps lies the proof that we were never meant to know how many times humanity has risen and fallen. All across the world whispers tell of giants. In the scriptures, in the sagas, in the myths, they walk as men who were more than men, towering, immense, impossible. The Bible speaks of the Nephilim, beings of great stature born of a union between mortals and something other. Norse legends recall frost giants who fought the gods. Native American traditions speak of red-haired giants who once ruled the land, only to be driven into extinction. These stories, scattered across continents and cultures, might be dismissed as myth if not for what was once found beneath the soil. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, newspapers across the United States reported strange discoveries. Enormous skeletons unearthed in burial mounds with jaws that could fit over the faces of ordinary men and femurs longer than a human torso. Farmers spoke of skulls with double rows of teeth. Archaeologists recorded bones that vanished into private collections, never to be seen again. The Smithsonian Institution itself was accused of confiscating giant skeletons, then quietly destroying them to preserve the accepted narrative of human history. Were these tales exaggerations, products of a sensationalist press, or were they fragments of truth that slipped through before the silence descended? Too many stories align across too many lands to dismiss them all. In South America, tales of giants appear in Incan lore, alongside reports of oversized bones unearthed in caves. In the deserts of Nevada, Paiute traditions tell of battles against massive red-haired beings whose remains some claim were once discovered in Lovelock Cave. In Asia, megalithic tombs suggest burials for beings of extraordinary size. If these skeletons existed, where are they now? Why do photographs disappear? Why do bones crumble into dust and vanish? Could it be that the existence of giants would rewrite everything we think we know about humanity's past? That evolution, as taught in schools, is not a straight line but a web of mysteries, including lineages that stretch taller, stronger and stranger than we are permitted to believe. There is also the question of power. Acknowledging giants would mean acknowledging that ancient myths were not mere stories, that the tales of gods mingling with mortals, of beings who once ruled before the flood, might have been accounts of history rather than fantasy. Such a revelation would ripple through religion, archaeology and science alike. And so perhaps the silence, the vanishing of bones, is not coincidence but design, a deliberate cover-up to keep humanity's origins within safe boundaries. And yet, the traces remain, petroglyphs depicting oversized figures standing beside ordinary humans, tools too large for normal hands, footprints pressed into stone measuring over 2 feet long. These are the echoes of something we are told should not exist. Imagine for a moment the world if giants truly once walked among us. If entire clans, perhaps even civilizations, of colossal beings lived, fought, and died upon the same ground we now tread. Imagine their knowledge, their strength, their presence reshaping early human societies. And imagine the fear such a truth would inspire in the institutions built upon the fragile idea that history is known, fixed and complete. The giants of old may never be acknowledged in textbooks, their bones may continue to vanish, their stories labelled as fantasy, but silence does not erase the questions. Why do so many cultures remember them? Why do the accounts of their remains keep resurfacing? And why does every whisper seem to end in disappearance? Perhaps the greatest proof of the giants is not what we find, but what we are not allowed to keep. The empty vaults, the confiscated bones, the sudden silences, these speak louder than any skeleton could. Long before satellites, long before planes could survey the Earth from above, maps existed that should not have been possible. Charts that depicted coastlines buried under ice, maps that sketched continents not yet discovered. Cartography so advanced it seemed to belong to another age entirely. These are the forgotten maps, the ones that whisper of knowledge lost, of civilizations erased, of a world that was once known in ways our history denies. One of the most famous is the Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral. On its surface it shows parts of Europe, Africa and South America. Nothing unusual perhaps, until you look closer. Because the map also appears to depict Antarctica 300 years before explorers even reached its frozen shores. More than that, it shows the continent without its ice cap, as if charted in a time when Antarctica's coasts were free of glaciers. Modern science tells us that would have been tens of thousands of years ago, before written history was supposed to exist. How could a 16th century admiral have known? He claimed his sources were older maps, drawn from civilizations long forgotten. And the Piri Reis map is not alone. The Oronce Finet map of 1531 also depicts Antarctica, again without ice. The Boache map of 1737 does the same. All drawn centuries apart, yet showing knowledge humanity was not supposed to possess. Are these coincidences? Or fragments of an ancient cartographic tradition carried forward through copies of copies until even their makers no longer understood what they were holding? Then there are maps like the Vinland map, which suggested Norse explorers reached America long before Columbus. Once dismissed as forgery, it continues to stir debate. Or the Zeno map of 1558, which depicted Greenland as multiple islands, knowledge confirmed only by modern geology. Even the Portolan charts of the medieval Mediterranean, with their uncanny precision of coastlines, raise questions. How could sailors, without satellites, without aerial views, achieve accuracy that rivals modern tools? If these maps are genuine, they hint at something staggering. A civilization, or multiple civilizations, whose knowledge of the Earth rivaled or even surpassed our own. Civilizations that charted the globe before the Ice Age ended. Civilizations capable of measuring coastlines, longitudes and latitudes that supposedly required modern technology. But instead of being studied with open minds, these maps are treated with suspicion, buried under debates of authenticity, quietly pushed aside. Why? Perhaps because they challenge the story. If the Piri Reis map truly shows Antarctica ice-free, then humanity's history stretches far deeper into the past than textbooks allow. If medieval maps reveal knowledge of places undiscovered, then history's timeline collapses. It would mean exploration, navigation, and global awareness existed long before we are told they did. It would mean that the age of discovery was not discovery at all, but rediscovery. The silence surrounding these maps is telling. They should be anomalies studied with wonder. Instead, they are framed as curiosities, hoaxes, or mistakes. But when anomalies pile upon anomalies, the pattern is harder to ignore. The hidden implication is that someone long ago mapped the world in its entirety, and that knowledge survived in fragments, only to vanish when it threatened the accepted order. Imagine unrolling one of those ancient charts. The world drawn not as medieval Europeans knew it, but as it truly was. Mountains, rivers and coastlines marked with impossible precision. Imagine realizing that someone had stood in places we believe were unknown, had seen the Earth in ways only modern satellites can confirm. Would you not ask, who were they, and what else did they know? The maps that shouldn't exist continue to whisper from library shelves, from archives, from forgotten collections. They are pieces of a puzzle whose image we are not supposed to complete. And so they linger at the edges of history, reminders that the world has been seen before, perhaps many times, by eyes we will never know. Beneath the sands of Egypt lie tombs that whisper of kings no history book dares to name. For every pharaoh we know, Tutankhamun, Ramses, Akhenaten, there are others whose stories have been silenced, entire reigns erased, their monuments dismantled, their names chiseled from stone as if they never existed. And yet, the desert remembers, the ruins remember. The hidden tombs, buried deep and sealed away, suggest that Egypt's history is not a single unbroken line, but a tapestry with threads deliberately cut. The Valley of the Kings, that silent necropolis of stone, holds more than archaeologists admit. Some chambers were discovered and quickly closed again, their walls decorated with figures whose faces were never catalogued, their hieroglyphs erased from official reports. Others remain sealed, not because they cannot be opened, but because opening them would demand an explanation history is not ready to give. Imagine the chaos if a tomb were uncovered holding a pharaoh no one had ever heard of, whose reign reshaped Egypt but was later wiped away. Imagine the rewriting of dynasties, the collapse of timelines, the acknowledgement that our neat history is a fabrication. Even among the pharaohs we do know, too many have vanished into mystery. Where is the tomb of Imhotep, the architect, physician and sage so revered he became a god? Where is the burial place of Cleopatra, the last of Egypt's queens, hidden so carefully that centuries of searching have yielded nothing? And what of the heretic king, Akhenaten, whose radical devotion to one god shook Egypt to its core? Why does his mummy remain missing? Are these absences accidents or deliberate concealments? There are also rumours of tombs that should not exist at all. Chambers hidden beneath the pores of the Sphinx, long spoken of but never acknowledged. Vast underground networks stretching beneath the Giza plateau, filled with artifacts and sarcophagi the public has never seen. Explorers have whispered of sealed doors and holes stretching into darkness, cut off from the world. Some say discoveries have been made only to be locked away by authorities. Others claim the knowledge is too dangerous to reveal, that it would overturn not only Egyptology but the story of civilization itself. Why conceal these pharaohs, these tombs, these legacies? Perhaps because their stories do not fit the tale we are told of ancient Egypt. Perhaps some ruled in eras we deny ever existed. Perhaps their reigns point to advanced knowledge, connections with distant lands, or powers that modern history cannot admit without rewriting everything. A hidden pharaoh is more than a lost king. It is a fracture in the official story, a glimpse into a version of the past that was meant to remain buried. And yet, the desert continues to give hints. Strange hieroglyphs carved in forgotten temples speaking of rulers unknown. Mummies found with features unlike any of their supposed dynasties. Artifacts bearing names never mentioned in official king lists. The pieces are there, scattered and fragile, waiting to be assembled into the picture no one wants to see. Imagine standing at the mouth of such a tomb, the air still, heavy with sand and silence, the walls painted with images of a ruler whose face is unfamiliar, yet crowned with the symbols of kingship. Imagine the inscription, Pharaoh of Egypt, yet no historian has ever spoken their name. What does it mean when history's most powerful rulers have been erased? Who decided they must vanish? And how much more lies hidden beneath the sands waiting for the right moment to return? Throughout history, prophets have risen, speaking words that bent time itself. They saw the rise of empires, the fall of kings, the birth of calamities centuries before they happened. Some were celebrated, many were ignored. But there were others whose visions were so unsettling, so precise that they were not ignored but buried. These were the suppressed prophecies, the texts hidden away in vaults and monasteries, sealed beneath stone, their words too dangerous to echo across the ages. From the caves of Qumran to the monasteries of Europe, fragments of prophetic writings whisper of futures that resemble our present all too clearly. Some texts describe floods and fires, the stars falling from the heavens, cities swallowed whole. Others speak of men who would rise as gods, or gods who would walk the earth disguised as men. And when such words align too closely with real events, they become not warnings, but threats threats to power, threats to the carefully constructed story of human destiny, and so they vanish. Take, for example, the prophecies attributed to the Sibyls of the ancient Mediterranean, women whose voices were said to come directly from the gods. Their scrolls were once treasured by Rome, but only fragments survive. The rest, historians tell us, were lost. Yet whispers remain that their missing verses spoke of empires collapsing in fire, of rulers betrayed, of a time when the old world would end in a single cataclysmic night. Convenient then that these verses disappeared at the very moments when rulers needed stability most. Or consider the case of Nostradamus. His name is famous, but his writings are incomplete. Many quatrains are missing, some destroyed, others locked away. The ones that do remain are vague enough to allow endless interpretation. But what of the verses that were too sharp, too exact? Did they speak of events yet to come, events that those in power could not risk the public preparing for? It would explain why certain editions of his work differ, why entire passages are unaccounted for. Even the Bible, a text at the heart of much of human history, shows signs of prophecy silenced. The Book of Enoch, once widely read, describes angels descending, imparting forbidden knowledge to humankind. It speaks of the great flood not just as punishment, but as an attempt to cleanse the world of something unspeakable. For centuries it was hidden, denounced as heresy, only rediscovered in the modern age. What other prophetic books were excluded, edited out of existence, their visions too troubling to align with doctrine? Then there are the strange predictions carved into temples and stones around the world. In South America, some inscriptions describe the coming of pale-skinned strangers centuries before Columbus arrived. In Asia, monks wrote of machines that would fly across the sky, weapons that could shatter cities long before the age of industry. Were these the products of imagination, or glimpses into futures they had no right to know? The question is not simply whether these prophecies were real, but why they were silenced. If a text predicts the fall of a kingdom, does it become a self-fulfilling curse? If it names a ruler as the destroyer of his people, does it weaken his throne? Knowledge has always been power, and prophecy, when it touches truth, is the most dangerous knowledge of all. To suppress a prophecy is to hold the future hostage, to deny generations the chance to prepare for what may come. And yet, some of these visions survive, hidden between the lines of accepted texts, whispered in monasteries, preserved by secret societies who claim to guard knowledge humanity is not ready for. Perhaps the greatest suppression of all is not the loss of the prophecies, but the loss of our willingness to listen to them. Imagine if every prophetic text ever silenced was suddenly revealed. Scrolls opened, verses read aloud, visions restored. Would we see our history as inevitable, or would we finally understand that the future was never fixed, that it was always written, erased, and rewritten by those who feared its truths? Across the ruins of the world, scattered among broken stones and buried beneath layers of earth, lie the remains of inventions that should not exist. Tools crafted with precision rivaling modern machines. Mechanisms designed to map the stars with uncanny accuracy. Devices that whisper of knowledge far beyond what ancient civilizations were supposed to know. They are called anomalies, mysteries, curiosities. But in truth, they are forbidden inventions, technologies that were buried not by accident but by intent. Take the Antikythera mechanism, pulled from the depths of the Aegean Sea. At first glance, it was little more than a lump of corroded bronze, but as its gears were examined, the truth emerged. This was no trinket. It was a machine of staggering complexity, capable of predicting eclipses and planetary movements with precision. A computer built 2,000 years before computers were thought to exist. And yet, history books still whisper that such sophistication was impossible in its time. How many other such devices remain hidden, dismissed as curiosities, or locked away in museums, never given the credit they deserve? Or consider Baghdad's mysterious batteries, clay jars with copper and iron components capable, when tested, of producing a small current, Why, thousands of years ago, would anyone build something so seemingly modern? Some suggest they were used for simple electroplating. Others believe they powered devices long since lost. And yet, despite their existence, no one dares admit the possibility that ancient civilizations harnessed electricity. To acknowledge that would be to shatter the story of progress we cling to, the tale that humanity crawled slowly, step by step, from darkness into light. In South America, carvings etched into stone depict what look like airplanes, complete with wings and tail fins. Archaeologists call them zoomorphic figures, stylized insects or birds. But when models of these figures are built, scaled and tested, they glide like modern aircraft. Were they toys, art, or blueprints of something more? If they are merely imagination, why do they function with aerodynamic precision no child's carving should possess? And then there are the impossibilities of architecture. Stones cut with laser-like accuracy, edges so sharp they resist the passage of a razor blade. Blocks weighing hundreds of tons lifted and placed with such precision that not even a piece of paper can slide between them. Some claim primitive tools did the work, but the evidence laughs at such explanations. To move such stones even today would require heavy machinery, cranes, and careful calculation. Yet ancient builders not only moved them, but raised them into walls, temples, and monuments that still stand defying earthquakes and time itself. What tools did they use, and why have those tools vanished from our record? The forbidden inventions extend beyond machines and architecture. Ancient texts speak of weapons capable of destruction on a scale unthinkable for their age. The Sanskrit epics of India describe chariots that soared through the sky, powered by energy unknown, and weapons that unleashed firestorms like nuclear blasts. Historians call them myths. But when the words of poets mirror the realities of modern warfare, should we dismiss them or wonder what remnants of those technologies were once real? If these inventions existed, why were they buried? Why were they erased? Perhaps because they belong to civilizations now gone, their knowledge feared by those who inherited the ashes. Perhaps rulers destroyed them to keep their power unchallenged, ensuring no rival could wield the same might. Or perhaps the inventions themselves proved too dangerous, their potential to destroy outweighing the desire to preserve. History, after all, is not just a story of what was created, it is a story of what was lost, and sometimes what was deliberately hidden. What would it mean if tomorrow we uncovered one of these inventions intact? A machine that mapped the stars more accurately than our telescopes. A device that harnessed energy without wires or fuel. A weapon older than nations, more powerful than anything we hold today. Would we call it a marvel or a threat? Throughout every empire, behind every throne, and in the shadows of every great upheaval, there are families whose names rarely make it into the textbooks. They are not remembered as kings or queens, but as something older, deeper, more enduring. Bloodlines that guard secrets stretching back to the dawn of civilization. Families whose wealth is not measured in gold, but in knowledge, knowledge carefully hidden, knowledge passed down in silence. The story of hidden bloodlines begins with whispers from the ancient world. In Mesopotamia, scribes wrote of priestly families who claimed descent from the gods themselves. Their role was not merely to serve temples, but to hold sacred knowledge, astronomy, mathematics, medicine, that the common people were never allowed to know. In Egypt, similar dynasties existed, the high priests who moved between pharaohs, surviving dynastic collapse after collapse, always keeping their line intact. Their true inheritance was not land or riches, it was wisdom. Centuries later in medieval Europe, powerful families emerged again, not only nobles who held armies, but banking dynasties who seemed untouchable. Some whisper that their influence came not from money alone, but from documents, maps, and manuscripts that told truths hidden from the public, bloodlines that possessed the lost books of Alexandria, scrolls of suppressed prophecy, or fragments of technologies long thought destroyed, secrets that would ensure their survival in every age, regardless of who wore the crown. The legend of hidden bloodlines weaves itself into conspiracy and myth. Some speak of descendants of Christ himself, a sacred lineage preserved by secret societies, watched over by monks who swore never to let the truth surface. Others suggest that bloodlines from ancient empires still linger, their surnames altered, their faces unremarkable, but their role unchanged. Families who know where relics are buried, who hold maps to cities never acknowledged, who keep alive the memory of civilizations erased from history. In the East, emperors were said to trace their blood back to divine ancestors, keeping their power legitimate by lineage. In the West, secret orders such as the Knights Templar, though officially dissolved, may have preserved more than treasure. Some believe their descendants still walk among us, custodians of knowledge too dangerous to reveal. And in every story, the pattern repeats. Bloodlines that guard secrets humanity is not ready for. Secrets that, if released, could rewrite everything we think we know about our past. What makes these families so powerful is not their wealth, but their silence. For generations they have passed down their inheritance through whispers, coded manuscripts, hidden vaults. They teach their children not to share, not to question, but to preserve. Knowledge becomes blood, knowledge becomes destiny. To belong to such a bloodline is to carry the weight of centuries, to be both protector and prisoner of truths that the rest of humanity will never see. And so we must ask, what are these secrets that must be guarded so carefully? Are they maps of lost lands, Atlantis, Tartaria, Lemuria? Are they the blueprints of forbidden inventions, machines capable of changing the world overnight? Or are they prophecies, words so dangerous that if spoken aloud the future itself could shift? Perhaps the greatest cover-up is not the erasure of civilizations, but the quiet survival of those who still remember them. If bloodlines exist that carry this knowledge, then history is not only written by the victors, it is preserved by the chosen. And that preservation comes with power, the kind that bends nations, shapes religions, and ensures that certain truths never see the light of day. What would happen if tomorrow one of these families broke their silence? If their vaults were opened, if their manuscripts were released, if their lineage was revealed for what it truly is? Would the world call it a hoax, a fantasy, a lie? Or would we finally see the threads that connect us not just to the past, but to the truths hidden deliberately in our present? Beneath the rolling waves of our oceans lie worlds we can barely imagine, sunken cities, stone roads swallowed by the sea, and shattered monuments buried in coral. The earth has always been restless, and water has always claimed what man builds. But some ruins are different. Some speak of civilizations not only lost, but deliberately forgotten, cultures erased as if their very existence threatened the story we tell ourselves about who we are. Off the coast of India, divers discovered the ruins of a city stretching for miles beneath the Gulf of Kampat. Massive walls, streets, and foundations rest hundreds of feet below the waterline, far older than any known Indian civilization. If true, they challenge the timeline of history, suggesting advanced societies thrived thousands of years before we were told cities even existed. Yet, despite the evidence, the site is dismissed, filed away as an anomaly, a curiosity not worth rewriting the textbooks over. In Japan's waters, the Yonaguni monument rises from the seabed like a forgotten ziggurat. Its carved steps, geometric platforms, and sweeping terraces look less like natural rock and more like the handiwork of deliberate builders. Some claim it is proof of an ancient civilization that flourished before the seas rose at the end of the last ice age. Others brush it off as coincidence, erosion that mimics architecture. But when divers swim through its corridors, they cannot help but feel they are moving through a drowned temple, one whose story no one dares to tell. And then there is Bimini Road, off the Bahamas. Perfectly placed limestone blocks stretch out beneath the shallow waters, forming what looks like a paved path into the deep. Locals long believed it to be part of Atlantis, the legendary city that Plato described as swallowed by the sea. Scientists claim the formation is natural, but the stones rest too neatly, too precisely for chance alone to explain. Perhaps Atlantis was never a myth but a memory, one of many civilizations erased by rising seas, then buried beneath the shifting sands of time. The oceans are vast, covering more than 70% of the planet, yet we have explored only a fraction of them. How many cities lie hidden beneath the waves, their walls cloaked in coral, their statues watching silently as fish swim past? How many libraries drowned in sudden floods, their scrolls lost forever to salt and silence? When the seas rose at the end of the Ice Age, they swallowed entire landscapes, fertile plains, river valleys, and coastal settlements that may have held millions of people. Today, we remember none of them. Official history says they never existed, but the ruins still whisper otherwise. What makes these underwater civilizations so dangerous is not just their existence, but what they imply. If cities once flourished thousands of years earlier than accepted, then our understanding of human history collapses. The story of slow, gradual progress becomes a myth replaced by one of cycles, civilizations rising, reaching heights of sophistication, and then drowning in catastrophe. Each time, the survivors are left to begin again, their ancestors' achievements erased by waves and forgotten by those who come after. Could this be why stories of great floods echo across so many cultures? From Noah's Ark in the Bible to Utnapishtim in the Epic of Gilgamesh to the tales of Manu in India, all speak of waters rising, of worlds destroyed, of knowledge carried into the next age by a chosen few. Perhaps these are not myths but memories of real floods that swallowed entire civilizations, leaving only fragments beneath the waves for us to find millennia later. What would happen if tomorrow one of these submerged cities was fully excavated? If a diver brought up an artifact that should not exist, a tool or device that proved humans were building advanced technologies 10,000 years ago? Would we rewrite our history, or would the artifact quietly disappear, tucked into a museum basement, never spoken of again? Time has always been the greatest storyteller, but it is also the greatest thief. For every stone that remains, countless others have been weathered away. For every scroll that survives, entire libraries have turned to ash. Civilizations rose, flourished, and disappeared, some remembered only as whispers, others erased so completely that even their names are lost. And yet, the echoes of these forgotten worlds still reach us, in myths, in ruins, in symbols carved into stone. What we call history is only a fragment, a tapestry with entire sections ripped away, patched over by those who decided which stories we were allowed to inherit. But the silences speak louder than the words. The missing chapters of humanity's past haunt us because they remind us that we are not the first. Not the first to build, not the first to dream, not the first to fall. Why were these stories buried? Was it to protect us from truths too powerful, too dangerous to be widely known? Was it to guard the secrets of lost technologies, ancient knowledge, or forbidden faiths? Or was it simply control, the need for those in power to shape the past so they could command the future? Whatever the reason, one fact remains. Our history has been shaped as much by what we've forgotten as by what we've been taught. But here's the truth. The past never really disappears. It lingers, waiting for those who dare to question, who dare to look deeper, who dare to piece together the fragments that were meant to be forgotten. The ruins still stand. The myths still sing. The stars still shine with the same patterns that guided the ancients. And if we listen closely, we realize that history is not dead. It is alive, calling us to remember. Perhaps the greatest cover-up is not about hiding the past, but about keeping us asleep, preventing us from seeing just how extraordinary, how vast, and how cyclical human civilization truly is. We have been here before, and we will be here again. So as you drift into sleep, let these mysteries linger with you. Let the questions hum softly in your mind. Who decides what is remembered? Who decides what is erased? And most importantly, what stories still lie waiting to be uncovered? If this journey through hidden history stirred something within you, stay with us. There are countless more secrets to uncover, countless more voices to hear, countless more pieces of the human story still waiting in the dark. Be sure to subscribe to our channel so you never miss the next chapter of forgotten history. Leave your thoughts and theories in the comments. We read everyone. Share this video with someone who also wonders about the mysteries buried beneath time. And if you enjoyed the story, give it a like. It helps more than you know. Of course, here's a stronger cinematic closer with natural rhythm built in, designed for 11 labs to deliver with weight and pauses. History is not just what we are told, it is what is hidden, what is silenced, and what still waits in the shadows. Tonight, we have uncovered only fragments, only whispers of the truths that were meant to be buried forever. But there are more, many more, and the journey is only beginning. If this story stirred something within you, don't let it end here. Stay with us. There are countless more mysteries to explore, countless more secrets to awaken. Make sure you subscribe, so you never miss the next hidden chapter. Leave your thoughts and theories in the comments. We want to hear them. Share this with someone who also wonders, who also dreams, who also feels the pull of forgotten history. And if this journey moved you, give it a like. It helps others find their way here, into the silence where truth still lingers. And when this video ends, don't stop. Watch another. Let the mystery carry you deeper, because the more we uncover, the clearer it becomes. Our past is not gone. It is waiting. So stay curious, stay awake, and join us again as we uncover the stories time tried to erase.